Hello everybody, today we are excited to present to you our final business analytics project. Today we will be taking a look at capital structure. I'm Bryce Lund.
I'm Jacob Rosenkoetter.
I'm Contreras.
I'm Ryan Johnson.
Here we have an overview of everything we'll be covering here today. The main question we're looking to answer is what are the factors influencing a company's capital structure? The measures for our independent variables are revenue, tax rate, total assets and liabilities, number of shares outstanding, the credit rating, and the cost of debt. The data source we used to find all this was through Yahoo Finance. The methods we used were multicollinearity, multiple linear regression, and then for extra credit we did the time series as well. And the conclusion we came to is that total liabilities, credit rating, and whether or not it's in the financial industry play a significant role in determining the capital structure. And below you'll see here we have the capital structure defined as the debt to equity ratio, which is how much debt is issued to service the company's obligations. Our motivation behind this was to help companies determine the proper capital structure in order to fit their company needs. The problem companies face is they struggle to find a balance between debt and equity. A properly chosen capital structure will help companies avoid this unnecessary risk. And like I was saying before, the main question we are trying to answer here is what are the factors influencing a company's chosen capital structure? So our hypothesis here, we believe that higher revenue, better credit rating, and higher total assets will increase this debt to equity ratio. And we believe that higher tax rate, higher number of shares outstanding, cost of debt, total liabilities will decrease this debt to equity ratio. We also believe that if it is in a riskier industry, it will have a lower debt to equity ratio. We wanted to take a look at these following factors to see if they would affect or influence the debt to equity ratio. We will be going into all of these factors on the next slide. The assumptions we made while doing this were that the Dow Jones Industrial Average includes a diverse subset of stocks and can thus use these observations to speak of all U.S. stocks. We say this as the Dow Jones has 30 stocks and thus follows the central limit theorem. We can also assume that the independent variables listed above are the most influential when choosing a capital structure. We assume that our independent variables are linearly related to our dependent variables in this. We also assume that the residuals are normally distributed. And finally, we can assume that Moody's rating is a good representation of a company's ability to repay their obligation. Moody's is one of the 3 big credit rating agencies which rates company bonds.
Here you can see our independent variables listed out, starting with revenue. The revenue is all the income that a company brings in through sales. The second one is the tax rate, the amount of tax that the government puts on the company depending on multiple variables such as industry, size of the company, etc. Our third variable, being shares outstanding, is the number of stocks issued to stockholders. The fourth variable is credit rating. Credit rating we retrieved from Moody's, which is, as explained before, one of the 3 largest credit rating companies. The credit rating is essentially the estimated ability of the corporation to fulfill their financial obligations. The cost of debt is essentially the amount of interest a company pays on its debt, and most times it's given as a percentage. The next one being total assets is basically just the sum of all of the assets that the company holds under its books. And similarly, total liabilities is the sum of all short-term and long-term liabilities under the books. Here you can see a screenshot of our data. On the left side you can see the company names, and next to that you can see our calculated DE ratio. And following that are other independent variables. Towards the end of the data you can see our dummy variables, starting with credit rating, ranked in a system where 1 being the highest credit rating, and so forth. The next dummy variables you can see are judged based on the industry in which the company is in. Now I'll be going over the methods we used in our project. Methods being multiple linearity, multiple linear regression, and time series. Multiple linearity, we use this method to describe the relationships between the independent variables. Because we believe that there are various factors affecting how a company chooses their DE ratio, we did the multiple linear regression analysis. And finally, we'll be going over the time series. We use this method in order to forecast the capital structure for Apple. Some model alternatives, single regression was not appropriate because we believe that there are various factors. Thus is why we did the multiple linear regression analysis. We did not do the quadratic regression because our residuals are normally distributed. And now I'll be handing it over to Alex to talk about our statistical analysis.
So as Ryan mentioned, I will be going over the statistical analysis. So again, we tested for multicollinearity. Again, the multicollinearity is where we test the independent variables to see if there's a strong correlation between them. And again, we listed our independent variables here. And we believe if the correlation between variables is greater than 0.7, then multicollinearity exists. So we ran the test, as you can see right here, and we found that total assets and total liabilities had a correlation of 0.996, so we determined that multicollinearity exists. So we decided to scrap total assets from our data set. All right, so this is the first regression that we ran. When we ran this regression, we got an R-square of 0.78. If you look at the variables here, you'll note that assets is no longer in there because there was multicollinearity between assets and liabilities, so we kicked out assets. Now, if you look at the p-values, you'll notice that a lot of them are over the 0.05 significance level. So what we're going to have to do there is find the max p-value, kick that out, and then run the regression, and then keep doing that with every p-value that is greater than the 0.05. So in reality, we had to run the regression 10 times, but because we are time constrained, we won't have time to go over every regression that we ran. All right, so now this is one of the last regressions we ran. If you look at the R-squared, now the R-squared is 0.73. If you'll look at the p-values, you'll notice that they're all under 0.05, so now they're all acceptable. But an issue that we encountered was when we were looking at the residuals of total liabilities, we found that there are two outliers, one right here and another one right there. And these outliers were JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. So we decided for our final regression to kick these out of the analysis because we believe that they were going to skew the model. And so we believe that ultimately we could create a better model if we kick these two companies out. All right, so after kicking out the outliers, we came up with this model. Our R-squared was 0.703. R-squared is also our coefficient of determination. And if you look at the p-values now, they're all acceptable, all under that 0.05. And this is the model that we came up with, where X1 is our total liabilities, X2 is our credit rating, and X3 is whether or not it is in the financial industry, which is a dummy variable. Okay, so now you'll see the residuals that our last regression yielded. Now if you take a look at the credit rating, you'll see that for the most part it deviates at a mean around 0. You'll see the same thing for the financial service industry. And our last residual plot is total liabilities. Now that one does look a little iffy, but we thought that for this class it was appropriate for the model. And now I'll be passing it on to Jacob.
To conclude, through our testing, we found that 5 out of the 8 variables did not have an effect on capital structure. Of the 3 factors that remained, we only had total liability, credit rating, and whether the industry was a financial service. Once again, our equation is seen here. The first variable being total liabilities, the second being credit rating, and the third is whether or not it's a financial industry. Our model coefficient of determination was 0.703, so that means only 30% of our company was unaccounted for. A weakness in our model that we noticed was that it didn't meet the central limit theorem. We had to take out 2 of the companies because they were extreme outliers. And to move on, for extra credit, we did a time series analysis for Apple. We chose Apple because it was a pretty well-known company and we know that the financial statements would be readily available. A couple of things to be noted for this analysis is that we had to change the equation because through Yahoo Finance we couldn't find the data we needed. So we went to SEC's website and we changed the equation to long-term debt over stockholders' equity. This is the sheet that were generated using all the forecasting methods that were taught to us this semester, which included naive, average, moving average, as well as smoothing, exponential smoothing. We found that naive forecasting method to be the most accurate because the mean square root error was the lowest. We believe this makes sense because in the finance world, it's believed that companies do not like to stray from their capital structure much. And so it makes sense that the best method to forecast this data would be basing it off of the previous data collected.
And finally, we have our scatter plot for our time series here. On the y-axis, we'll have the debt-to-equity ratio. X-axis is the quarters, and you'll see it follows a linear trend upwards there.
Thanks,
Sajad.